the Hermit's House, retold by S. E. Schlosser. She was nervous, and she did not know why. It was a perfect place for them to stay for the season, an old abandoned house where a hermit once lived. Perhaps she was spooked at the idea of sharing the house with a corpse, for the body of the hermit lay enshrined in a birch-bark coffin in the loft. It was an old custom, and one no longer popular among the Iroquois people, for which she was thankful. But the hermit had a reputation for being odd, and when he insisted on staying in his home after his death, the folks from the nearby village had done as he wished. The house was open to any who wanted to stay there, and hunters sometimes spent the night. But the Iroquois women in the nearby village had warned her against stopping there with her baby daughter. The house had a strange reputation, and the hermit himself had told the women of the village to stay away. She told her young husband what the village women had said, but he only laughed at that gossip. There was good hunting here, her man had declared, and soon they would prosper, and he could build a better home for her and their baby daughter. So they traveled along the footpaths until they came to the hermit's house, and they unpacked their few belongings in the front room. She would not, she told her husband, go up into the loft where the hermit's body lay in its birch-bark coffin. Her husband teased her for being cowardly, but she would not be moved from her decision. Her husband left the house soon afterward to hunt. She immediately put her daughter in the sling on her back and went to look for roots and berries. It would make a nice addition to whatever her husband killed for supper, she reasoned, although her real purpose was to get out of the hermit's house. She stayed away until her husband returned with the meat, and then went inside to prepare the evening meal for them. Her husband yawned and stretched, tired from his hunting, and climbed up into the loft to rest. The hut soon filled with the delicious smell of roasting meat. She was sorting through the berries when she heard a muffled cry and the very final-sounding crunch of breaking bones. She stiffened in shock and was about to call out, but some instinct stopped her. As she stared upward, frozen in horror, blood started to drip from the rafters above the place her husband had lain down to sleep. She heard sounds of gnawing and slurping coming from the loft overhead. On the pretext of getting something from one of the packs, she crept silently to the far corner of the room where she could see up into the loft. A skeleton with glowing red eye sockets was sitting on the legs of her dead husband. His teeth and chin were covered with blood, as if it had been feasting on his body. She crept back out of view before the skeleton saw her, and was quietly sick in the corner. Her daughter stirred restlessly at her back, and she knew that she had to get away immediately, or she and her child would be killed too. "I'm going to run down to the stream to fetch water for the broth," she called toward the loft. "I will be right back." She took the pail and walked carelessly toward the stream, trying to appear normal. As soon as she was out of sight among the trees, she started to run as fast as she could, back along the footpaths to the nearest village. The baby bounced and bumped in the sling. Not liking the jarring movements, her infant daughter began to cry. Her wails were answered by a terrible howl from the direction of the house. The evil creature had just realized that they were escaping. The young mother ran as fast as she could through the darkening woods. She could hear the creature's howls growing closer as it pursued them, and she increased her speed, tearing off one of her scarves and throwing it down for the skeleton to maul. She heard the trees rustling behind her, and then the sounds of pursuit stopped for a moment as the beast pounced on her scarf and tore it to bits in its fury. She kept running, her little daughter wailing desperately as she sensed her mother's fear. Each time she heard the creature drawing close to her, the young mother threw off another scarf for it to savage, until she had none left. Then she threw off her moccasins, one after the other, to buy them more time. She was sobbing exhaustedly, and was nearly without hope. Her infant was clinging to her hair, too scared even to cry as they fled through the darkness. She could hear the monster gaining on her, and she had nothing left to shed save the few items keeping her decent enough to enter the village. The creature's howls were very close now, and she knew that she was unable to run much further. She could see the lights from the Iroquois village through the trees in front of her, though it was still far off. In a last act of despair, she shouted the Iroquois distress cry, hoping someone would be near enough to hear it. To her joy, her call was taken up by women's voices from just outside the wall of the village, and answered by the warriors from within. The creature was so close now she could hear it breathing. She summoned the last of her strength and sprinted to the trees at the very edge of the village. Here her strength failed her, and she collapsed to the ground, her little daughter wailing in terror. Before the monster could pounce on them, a party of warriors burst through the gates of the village. The creature leapt back into the trees as the warriors surrounded her, searching left and right for her attacker. They swung their torches wide when they glimpsed a figure in the trees, and the skeleton retreated farther into the woods. The young mother lay gasping and sobbing on the ground, too spent to speak. Realizing